Dimensions of Learning. My name is Alvin Ruley, and this podcast is The Power of Inspiration. In talking about the dimensions of learning in the segment that our spectrum, I said segment, but the spectrum that I'll be talking about today is still on personal growth. I will focus on the education, how it affects your personal growth. With the previous podcast that I've done, I talked about personal growth with respect to what happens internally within you that'll lead you to the point of reaching the ultimate level of development, ultimate level of learning, ultimate level of understanding your truth. Okay, so we include, I say we, but it was I, focused on the mind, spirit, heart, and the emotions, and realizing the goal was to have each one of them stable. And with that stability, you start to understand or get into that stability. You understand the barriers that was there that you had to overcome, so that you could get a clarified experience of, what is your true living testimony with respect to you reaching your goal of, I'll say ultimate goal of learning where you're living your truth. So that was the focus on, I'll say probably all three of the podcasts that I've done previously. So now, for this particular one, education, that is our interest. Well, now let's put it like this: the education system. When you enter into kindergarten, first grade, whichever level, but when you enter into that system, that's our introduction into our indoctrination into a system that is going to teach your mind to understand words and numbers. And it's going to teach your mind to learn how to make money. To make money, as opposed to teaching your mind to learn the value that you yourself as an individual has. Okay, so, those two things, as far as teaching you to make money and teaching you the value of what you have within, they create they complicate the education process. So that's what I'll say. They complicate the education process. Okay. We're going to go in history as far as 1964 is the year. I'll start with the integration of the school systems as far as the black and the white, or white and all of the other cultures of integration. That particular integration in itself set the United States back 15 years as far as with educational levels of, I'll say, understanding what they were educated in. What we were understanding in the United States was set back 15 years compared with the global education processes. And reasons behind that, not necessarily all the reasons, but some of the reasons behind that was what we done in America. United States of America is what I'm referring to. But what we done, we took the Black community and placed them into the system of the white community. And with respect to discipline the Black child, all of it starts at home, but the discipline at home is different than the discipline in the school system. And the behaviors at home is different than the behaviors in the school system. So when we go into the school system, during the integration and still up to now, a lot of the teachers, their only interface with another culture is within that system. There's stereotypes that they may have based on the media or social media carries over into the classroom. And this is, throughout history. This is nothing as far as recent or anything, but it is still recent. Because the students that have behavior problems, what I'm talking about now is a barrier as far as for the personal growth and the educational system having a barrier. And it's no fault of the people. It's just, innately as, we're born into our cultures. We live in our cultures. We go in, we get our education so that we can become teacher, preacher, whatever we may become. But if we don't go live in another culture, we won't understand the behaviors. And understanding the behaviors is very important for being able to teach or preach. Because some students, it's not that, they need special attention, but they just need the guidance and getting the direction going. And once they get that guidance, then they can understand or reach the level of understanding with almost any subject or topic that they have an interest in. And if the teacher see the student as quiet and not saying much and reserved, or if they see the student as, loud, overreactive to everything, those two combinations, teacher got to balance that and get that student to those students, because there's the whole spectrum there, to try to focus, so that the learning, so that their behaviors don't distract them or others from the learning. Okay? Because what can be perceived as bad behaviors aren't necessarily bad behaviors for the child doing them, because you'll see that they may not lead to any type of harm or anything to anyone, but they're only creating the distraction. So modern day schools, they have special classes for some of the students that on the overreactive side. But during 64 and the integration, 1964, integration of the school systems, all the way up to, you really bring it up to the 90s and more, but if you were, if you had a behavior concern that the teacher couldn't address, now you were labeled as special ed. And then with the special ed kids, now that made you were, what you were learning was behind what everyone else was learning. Not that you weren't really mentally capable of learning it, but because the teacher wasn't capable of managing their learning with your behavior, and that didn't allow you that opportunity to learn. Okay, I'm going to close this for right now because the education system and education in itself, are very vital, for what's going on in society right now. The goal, as far as with my mission, is to help re-educate people because the education system doesn't prepare you to understand who you are. So when you understand who you are, it makes it easier to understand the different dimensions of learning that you can go through so that you can reach that ultimate level of, taking all of the barriers down and then really communicating it back out to the people and, understanding your clarified experiences and how they got you to where you are, and you can help recreate or re-educate and even train, other people to help train people to understand who they are so that they can understand the truth that's really, the Holy Spirit's within each one of us, and that's where our truth is dwelling, and once we learn, what's really up in there, it's like following that pathway to your purpose. The truth is going to reveal your purpose. So you follow that pathway and you learn to live what you have learned is the truth of your understanding of what your role or purpose for living is. And that truth will be written in your mind, your heart, and your spirit. That's that ultimate level of learning. You learn to live. All right, so when I come back along, I'll continue, but it'll be at a different level, and we'll just continue with the dimensions of learning, and the spectrum that we're on will be still personal growth, but we'll be in the spectrum of education. Take care.